Hey y'all, welcome to Alliecat Customs. In this video, I'm going to be showing y'all how to set your pinion depth, your backlash, and how to read a pattern as I build this 10 bolt that goes in this 2000 Chevrolet Silverado. So y'all stick around. All right, y'all, so just as a recap, this is a 8.6 GM 10 bolt, and it's going into a 2000 Chevrolet Silverado, and I'm doing a ring and pinion install, and I'm about to show y'all how I set the pinion depth. But before I do that, I want to tell y'all what the pinion depth is and why it matters in the setup of the ring and pinion gears. So I'm about to dive into that right now. All right, y'all, so I drew up a really rudimentary drawing of a ring and pinion gear to kind of show y'all what I'm working with and why the pinion depth matters. So as you can see, in black is the pinion gear, and this is the ring gear and the carrier. And in red is your pinion bearing and your carrier bearings. So this is where the adjustments will be, is at these bearings to set your backlash, which is the movement of the ring gear, and your pinion depth, which is the movement of the pinion gear in and out of the housing. So in this video, we're going to be doing the pinion depth. And what that is the relationship of the ring and pinion gear. They're based off of the center line of the ring gear, which is the center line of the carrier and axle shafts and everything on this side of the axle. So the deeper your pinion gear is the closer the pinion head where the gears are is to the center line of the axle, the center line of your ring gear. And the shallower that your pinion is the further away it is. And so this measurement will be seen in the gear pattern as a deep or a shallow pattern on your ring gear when you run a pattern. This is there's different ways of getting this measurement. There's various tools available to help you to be able to measure this. And there's also people, and this is how I learned how to do it, is really basing your change off of your pinion shim change based off of what the pattern shows you, whether you know you need to add or subtract shims. So that's what I'm going to be doing, and I'll talk about the other ways and why you may not want to use those different ways to set your pinion depth. So I'm about to show you that. All right, y'all, so there's various different ways of measuring to set up your pinion depth. On your pinion head, it shows, a lot of them will show a number on the face of the pinion head. I'm trying to see. The number on this is so grayed out that I can't even read it. Yeah, so that wouldn't help me to begin with. It is really bad scuffed up, and I'll show you a close-up of what I'm working with. It's extremely scuffed up. So the number on the pinion head on this ring and pinion won't even work. So what that is it shows the distance. What this number up here would show is the distance from the face of this pinion to the center line of your carrier on your axle. And there's different ways of showing how to do that. Let me put this down. And there's various tools that you can use to measure the relationship of the center line of your carrier, the center line of your ring gear, to the head of the pinion. And I bought a more budget-friendly pinion depth checker, and I've never used this style of pinion depth checker, and it's kind of a harder setup, I believe, than using a higher quality pinion depth checker. I've used the kind that actually has the pucks that go into the carrier bearings, and that centers or shows you the center so you can measure easier from the center line of this down to the pinion head. With this kit, you have to find your carrier center using this kit, and then turn around and measure from your center line that you found using this to find the depth on the pinion head. So it tends to add extra steps and tends to take a little bit longer. I got a wild hair to buy this kit, and I said while I was doing this how-to series, I was going to use this tool to set this up, but I really am not interested in trying to figure this out while I'm doing a full how-to series. Maybe when I play with this and use this on a couple axles and see how I like it, maybe I'll do a how-to specifically on using this tool. But for now, I'm going to show you how I typically do it. All right, so I got my pinion shims laid out right here and my inner pinion bearing. And the pinion bearing will ride back here on the pinion shaft like this, and it's going to get pressed into place. And between this bearing here and the shaft is going to be some pinion shims. And the thickness of these shims is going to tell whether you have a deeper or a more shallow pattern on your gear, on the ring gear when you run a pattern on it. So I measured the shims that came off of the old ring and pinion setup, and if you watched my video where I took this rear end apart, you'll know that the rear end was put together and ran with setup bearings on it. And the bearings actually spun and chewed up the pinion shim, but I got it reading off of it. I measured it, and I got some new shims out that measured up to the same thickness. So I want to try that as my first thickness, and I'm gonna set the rear end up, run a pattern on it, and from that pattern, I'll know where to make a change at. So diving in. The pinion shim goes between the inner pinion bearing and the pinion head. So I put the shim in place and then press the pinion bearing on. I use an old inner pinion bearing race as a spacer so I don't damage the pinion bearing as I press it on. Next, I slide the pinion into the housing, and then I put the outer pinion bearing in place and the yoke. You do not use the pinion seal or a crush sleeve on an initial setup. You don't do that to the final assembly. And then I get ready to set my initial pinion bearing preload. To set your pinion bearing preload, you slowly torque the pinion nut down until you feel some drag on the rotation of your pinion, and then you can adjust the tightness to get to your pinion bearing preload that you want. I set mine up to about 15 inch-pounds, and that is the spec for new bearings. I have a full video that I'm making on the process of setting your pinion bearing preload, so be sure to check that out also. Now that I rotated the axle over, I install the carrier and ring gear with the outer carrier bearing races, and be careful because it's heavy and everything is sharp. Now I place my carrier bearing shims between the outer carrier bearing race and the axle housing. I start with the shims opposite of the ring gear, and then I slide the ring gear and carrier over and install the shims on the opposite side. The installing the shims will be very tight, and that's to allow for carrier bearing preload once you get them set in place. It's close. Now I can install my carrier caps. Make sure that you install your carrier caps on the correct side and in the correct orientation, the way they came off of the axle. I'm using ARP studs, and I torque them to 60 foot-pounds. Now I can check backlash. I hold the pinion tight and gently rock the ring gear back and forth and seeing how much movement it has between the gears. Alrighty, 7th thou backlash, first setup. Now that the axle is together and I'm happy with the backlash, it's time to put gear marking compound on the ring gear. You thin out the marking compound with a few drops of gear oil so you can get a nice thin coat of marking compound on the gear teeth. And I usually go 4 or 5 gear teeth, and then I can rotate the axle and get my pattern set. On the drive side, you can see the next markings. This definitely looks a little, looks a little deep. It is a little deep, but it's pretty square on the center. And that's with a 31 thou pinion shim, 7th thou backlash. See what it does. All right, y'all, so I have the first pattern ran on this rear end setup. And I ran a 31 thou pinion shim, and I have it at 7th thou backlash. And as you can see on the pattern, it's just a hair too deep, which means I want to take some out of the pinion shim to move the pinion away. The kind of philosophy of setting up a rear end gear is you base your pattern off of your pinion depth, because there is you have to set your backlash up according to your pinion depth. So once I take this apart and I change the pinion depth, when I set this back up, the backlash will most likely need to be adjusted to get it back to where I originally had it in this first setup. So you read your pattern based off of that. If you continue, each time you adjust your pinion depth, if you get your backlash set back, like I have a 7th thou backlash, if you have your backlash set back to the same spec, you really don't have to worry about your pattern getting too far out on the heel and toe. It's really just the depth from the root to the tip of the gear. So that's what I'm gonna be doing, is going back out, pulling the carrier out, setting it aside, pulling the pinion out, pulling the inner pinion bearing out, changing shims. I'm gonna go down 5 thou on the pinion shim, see what it works. Put everything back together, reset the pinion bearing preload. Of course, all of this is being set up without a pinion seal in it, without a crush sleeve in it. I'm using a crush sleeve eliminator, but both the same thing. This is just setup process. So no pinion seal, no crush sleeve or eliminator. and just going back in it. And once I get a good pattern and I'm happy with it, then I'll take it back apart for the last time, install those parts, come all the way out with it, and then run a pattern one last time, and everything's good to go. It's going back under the truck. So about to start taking it apart right now. The carrier will be pretty tight, so in order to get it out, I use a pry bar on both sides to gently ease it up. And once I get it up to where I can get a hold of it, make sure that you grab your carrier shims so you can keep them separate and on the right side of the carrier so you don't mess up your backlash when you go back together. I have a bearing puller that makes short work of pulling a pinion bearing off of the pinion. And I'm doing a full video on this exact puller. So be sure to check that out so you can get one for yourself. All right, y'all, so I just got the inner pinion bearing pulled from the pinion, and this is where the pinion shims sit. It's between the inner pinion bearing and the pinion gear right here. Make sure I get them all off. I only had two of them there. And this is I believe this is a 31 thou stack I have here. And I'm gonna be going down to whatever this is. I'm gonna remeasure this. I'm gonna pull 5 thou off of that. So, and to measure your shims, don't measure multiple shims together, because any gear oil, any grit, anything like that, any waviness in the actual shims themselves can throw off your reading. So it's best if you measure one shim at a time and then add the shims together, to where you can try to get a decent reading like that. I found that there can be a good bit of variance like that. I mean, you take a stack of shims together and see how much there is waviness in there and stuff, and it seems to give you too much variance when you're dealing with 1 thou worth of difference size on it. So I'm gonna measure these out using a micrometer. I got a dial type micrometer. Get these measured out and make sure what I have. All right, so I wondered why I measured both of the shims together, made 35 thou. So I went and measured the original shim that was under the old ring and pinion that come out of this rear end, and this one got chewed up a bit because of the inner bearing race spinning on the pinion gear. Measuring a couple different spots, and I'm coming up with anywhere from 36 to 34 thou on it. So I measured this yesterday, and I measured that together, and I don't know where after setting up and taking a break, I don't know how I ended up thinking I had 31 thou. So I'm gonna write it down now to make sure that I have it right. But these two shims is a 35 thou, not a 31 thou. So I'm gonna take 5 off, go down to a 30 thou shim thickness, reinstall everything, and see what she looks like. So this is a stack of shims Comes with your kit, and I'm going to be digging through these shims and seeing the best way to get a 30 thou shim stack out of this. So I'm about to start measuring right now. Right on the bat, I got a 20 and a 10. Perfect. All right, so I went through the stack. The first two I pulled out a 20 and I pulled out a 10. So now I have a 30 thou shim stack here. And I'm going to wipe everything down, make sure I don't have any grit off my fingers, off anything right here. Make sure everything's nice and clean. I'm gonna start putting this back together, press the pinion bearing on, and go ahead and reset my pattern and show you what the pattern is with a 5 thou less shim thickness from a 35 thou to a 30 thou. So let's see what we get. All right, so I got my dial indicator set into place and I'm checking backlash, and I have, looks like I have 8 thousandths of backlash. With the other setup, I had 7 thou backlash, so 1 thou, it's right there in the range where I would be okay with it. I'm not gonna take it back apart to chase 1 thou, but I will say that when you change your pinion depth, it can and it obviously will affect your backlash. So you will need to recheck your backlash, and you may need to change it depending on how far you've moved your pinion gear to change your backlash, because everything is predicated off of your pinion depth. So now that I have the backlash set and I'm okay with an 8 thou backlash on it, I'm gonna run a pattern and see what the new pattern looks like. Alrighty. All right, so I got the gear marking compound on here, and you really want to thin the gear marking compound out. Don't want to use a whole lot, but you want to coat both the drive and the coast side of the gears. Get a good even coat on them so that you get a good reading, but it doesn't have to be thick. The thicker you get the gear marking compound, it actually gets harder to read the pattern. You just want a good even coverage across the gear. Then you can rotate the gear around and get your marking. Alrighty, let's get it spin back up and look at our pattern. Alrighty, you can see our pattern right there. And what I do is I spin the ring gear around and use the pinion, because you're spinning a multiplied gear, a 390 gear, so the pinion is going to try to spin hard, and plus having the preload on the pinion bearings, it's going to leave a good mark on it. So just rotate the ring gear back and forth, and when you get your marking compound, I just spin it around a few times to get a good pattern on it. So we're going to check it out. All right, so the drive side looks really good. It's pretty close to in the center. I'll look at the second pattern. See if I like it. I like that. It's kind of mirrored on the coast pattern. That looks good. Let's see what the pinion looks like. Alrighty. Well, I nailed it on the second time. The original setup was with a 035 shim on the pinion and 7 thou backlash on it. I ran a pattern, felt like it was a little too tight, so I pulled 5 thou out of the pinion and reset it up. It has 8 thou on the backlash. So the pattern looks like, I can kind of see that the pattern is moved a little bit, but it's really close to in the center, so it doesn't need the backlash changed. I could go a little tighter if I really wanted to on it. I want to think about that, but I'm going to send this pattern to a couple of my buddies and brag that it seems like on the second setup I have a good pattern already. I was hoping I'd have some more patterns that maybe I would overstep or something like that. But it's too cold in the shop for me to really try to. We were doing a whole lot of taking it apart, putting it back together, taking it apart, putting it back together. So secretly, I'm very happy that I don't have to do that again. But I got to take it apart one more time for final assembly. So I want to take a bit of a break, send these pictures, do a little bragging, and see what Chandler thinks about his gear set. I know he's going to be happy that they set up well. And and then it's going to be time to take it back apart, set it for final assembly. So I'll see y'all then. All right, so I got the second pattern set up on this rear end, and kind of the good and the bad news, I guess, since I'm making a how-to, is I got it pretty good on the second setup, and it's going to be the pattern that I want to go with on my final assembly. So I kind of was hoping that I would go too far one way and then go too far the other way and then get back in the middle to show you kind of how the patterns will move, because not only am I trying to show how to set the pinion depth, how to set backlash, but also trying to show y'all kind of how to read the patterns. But since I have a good pattern right here, I'm going to give you kind of a rundown on what you're looking for when you read the pattern, and what you may need to do to move the pattern around so you get a good pattern. So let's dive in, look down here, and I'll show you the drive side and the coast side to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking for. All right, so what we're looking here is you're looking at the drive side of the gear, and this is the top of the axle up here. So the rotation of the gear on this 10 bolt in the back of a truck will be this way under power. And the drive side of the gear, you can tell because it is square with the rotation of the ring gear, and your coast side will have a big angle on it. So it's got a big angle back to make the tooth. So this is the drive side. I'm using my little straw here as a pointer. So you have your heel up here at the tip out here, the top side of it. Down here is the toe, and then you have the tip, and then the root down here in the base of the gear. All right. So earlier when we had when I did the 0335 shim, there was a hard line down here at the bottom of the gear down here, and that hard line indicates that the pinion is too close to the center line, of the axle, so it digs pretty far down into the pattern. If it's the pinion is too far away from the ring gear, then you'll have a pattern that's way out here, and the tip of this edge will be wiped off, and you'll have kind of a half moon shape, and the pattern will kind of crawl back and forth across the gear. If your backlash is too loose, you'll have the pattern way out here, and if the backlash is too tight, it'll crawl the pattern down towards the toe. So right in here, kind of have a football look to it. That's a good pattern. Right now I'm at an 8 thou backlash. If I tighten this down to a 6 thou, this pattern here would crawl back down more towards the center of the gear or the other side of the gear. But that's a good pattern. That's something that I'm willing to run. So let me set you up and show you. Let's see, I'll move it. Show you the second pattern. Sometimes will tell you just as well. People will call it the ghost pattern or whatever, but it's the second time it smudges on the gear, and you can usually tell real well the same thing. You have kind of that oblong looking football pattern right there, square on the gear. So that shows it there. And I'll get you turned around and show you the coast side and see how it looks. All right, and this is the coast side, and as you can tell, you can see here, you can see the gear where this will be in line. You have a big angle on these teeth, so this is the coast side or the back side of the gear. And as you can see, you have the same kind of football looking pattern in the center on the coast side. So it kind of matches the drive side and the coast side. They pretty well match, so that's going to be a good pattern right there, and it's going to be ready for a final assembly. All right, since this is a good pattern, this is going to be the pattern I want to try to achieve with the final assembly. I'm about to pull this axle all the way back down to a bare housing, and then I want to do put a crushed sleeve eliminator in and set my final pinion bearing preload, install the pinion seal, and then put the rear end back together. And I'm still kind of thinking about chasing that Backlash. I'm kind of a nerd about that. I feel like I would want it a little bit tighter. Some people want a lot looser, a lot tighter. There's a lot of theories on that. I feel that with age, that once you get some wear on it, the Backlash will loosen up a little bit. It seems in my experience to want to loosen up. Since this truck's going to have a lot of power and going to get abused hard, I really don't want to get it too far out and have a chance of breaking a gear. So depends on how froggy I feel in this 30-degree weather, whether or not I try to do that. But I'll pull it out and I'll show you all the steps of final assembly, and then we'll see the final pattern before I let y'all go. So about to take it apart now. For final assembly, I clean all the surfaces, and then I install the outer pinion bearing after I lube it, and then I install the pinion seal and tap it into place. Now I can install the pinion with the crushed sleeve eliminator on the pinion shaft. I talk about how to set that up in another video, so be sure to check that out so you can see how a crushed sleeve eliminator works. But once I get the pinion set in place, I put the yoke on and put the nut on so I can torque the whole assembly down. I torque it to 140 foot-pounds and then check my pinion bearing preload, and it checks out to 15 inch-pounds, so I can continue the build. All right, so when I was checking the Backlash for the final assembly, I found that it read 6 thou, so I checked it multiple places around the ring gear to make sure that was right. So without me adjusting the Backlash, it moved down to 6 thou, which I was happy with. So I checked the gear pattern, and I'm happy with the gear pattern. So I finished the build by taking the pinion nut off, installing Loctite, and then retorquing the pinion nut. And then the build is complete. All right, y'all, so after confirming that I have a good pattern on the ring gear, everything looks good on this. I have 6 thou Backlash now, which is right in the money where I really wanted to be at. So this rear end is going to work really well and last a good long time. So I'm excited about it. These Yukon gears set up really easy. I know I was trying to do a how-to and show y'all. I was hoping that I could get the pattern to move around, but as cold as it is, I'm kind of really happy that I got it done in 3 tries. The initial setup, changed the pinion shims to change the pinion depth, and then when I checked that was done. So then I did the final assembly, and everything looks great. So that's a really good setup. It's basically 4 times having this axle apart and back together. Sometimes you may need to take a whole lot more steps at times to do that. Sometimes it wants to fight you, but if you go through and do, and kind of how I showed you how to do things as far as moving the shims and setting things up, it'll come together. Just be patient with it and just keep working at it, and you'll eventually get a good pattern on it. Once you get that good pattern, you're good to go, and you can put all your final assembly on everything, set all your torque all the things down, set all your settings the way you want them, put all the seals in it, and it's good to go. So I'm happy with this. I'm about to get this axle ready so we can put it in the truck, set it the rear suspension. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope y'all found it helpful. And if you did, check out the rest of the build on this old truck and keep on coming back right here to Alliecat Customs.